Watch Twitter collapse in real time. See the lights go down on Broadway. Over on the other window. All right, looks like everything's moving here swimmingly. All right, except the penny didn't start. All right. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Hey, Chris. Hey, Martin. Hungry I am not. I just ate. Cold is what I am. It is chilly in here. Hey, Angela. Hey, Bruce. Hey, Larry.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the
Hey,
Congress
Rodney. Hey,
Hotel
Susan.
in
Hey,
Chicago.
Tom.
And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's great
Hey, just watching the imminent collapse of Twitter over on Twitter. But the show goes on. Hey, Karen. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Elaine. Hey, Mary Rose. Hey, Timothy. Oh, Susan. Where's that there? I think they've got the radiator fixed, but it hasn't really kicked in yet. Hey, Tracy. Yeah, I gotta tell you, folks. I get up, the radiator's not working. I go on Ticketmaster, Ticketmaster's not working. I go on Twitter, Twitter's about to break. I'm afraid to go to the bathroom. Hey, Karen. Hey, Katie. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Marita. Hey, Leah. Yeah, we're all staying warm here. Hey, Timberly. Welcome anybody new. Good evening, everybody. Welcome along. I'm a little behind on planning ahead. Hey, Elaine, really that wasn't as bad as I was afraid of. With that particular topic, I thought we might get some real nuts. It's the kind of one that tends to attract some. And that was just a couple of trolls, really. Hey, Phoenix. Hey, Heather, Kathleen. Hey, Betsy, thank you. This is a nice warm one, as it has been. It's about 50 in the house. 50 or 60. We do have, both Priya and Miles are curled up on a comforter over on the couch. Yeah, Phoenix, we've got a rolling radiator, but it's not working. It's like pretty much everything today. Everything is broken. Evening, Johan. If that is your real name. Hey, Laurie. Hey, Gary. Good evening, John. But yeah, they've put in the fix for the radiator. The part came in. The guy, I've heard the banging around. It just hasn't kicked in yet. There is a fireplace back there, but it's not real. Is it Life Day, Octavio? Life Day.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Evening, Dana. Glad to have you. Been a while since I did this program, too. Katie, I don't doubt it. Hey, Mom. Hey, Evelyn. Hey, everybody. Welcome along. Another edition of Mysterious Chicago. This is one of our first tours we put together here at Mysterious Chicago. One of the first virtual editions. Normally I turn Twitter off to make sure I'm not getting notifications mid-tour, but looks like it might crash any minute now. December 5th, Zoo Lights. Evening, David. Hey, everybody. Luckily, I just had a warm meal and I've got a nice hot glass, so my fingers were too cold to do a whole lot of work today. Hey, Florachita. Oh, you know, I could make this louder. Aha, there we go. See, this is the other thing. I haven't had this window up in a long time. I had to switch all of the stuff around. Johan, well, it's not really about you. It's about, the 24-hour news cycle. And how scams from yesteryear are very similar to scams of today. Hey, Diane. Miguel, my plan for Thanksgiving night is probably to crash. I'll be eating. We do our Thanksgiving meal around like 1 o'clock or so.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Hey, Rose, feel good. Or feel better anyway. Welcome along, everybody. Down a bit. Head in out of the scarf for out of effect. Hey, Patty and Casey. Yeah, well, there have been about 1,000 resignations at Twitter that anybody knows of. There's not even a skeleton crew running the engineering staff right now, so as soon as something happens, it's pretty much screwed. Elon has shuttered the offices. I really underestimated just how stupid that guy was. I mean, I figured there was some snake oil there. I came of age in the 90s. I instantly don't trust CEOs. Corporate goons, Well, now they're down to very bare engineering staff, if any engineering staff at this point. He has shuttered the offices. I guess he just took his own account private. So, somebody else will come around and save it sooner or later. He'll just lose $40 billion. I'm fine with that. Morally wrong to let stupid people keep their money. Hey, Christine. Hey, Doreen. I imagine it'll still be up running tomorrow, but it'll probably crash sometime when we least suspect it. But right now, everybody's just tweeting out their drafts folder and treating it like we're on the Titanic and making sure we don't miss the dessert cart.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
Yeah, somebody's gonna start a new one that'll take it over. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Cindy. We're gonna let Benny Goodman do one more tune before I get started properly. Okay, well, keep me posted. I don't know what my April schedule is going to be like yet. I'm really trying not to think that far ahead. Right now, I can't even think as far ahead as next Thursday. I don't have anything scheduled yet. I was going to do a lot of that today, but then it's really cold in the apartment. The radiator, we believe, has probably been fixed, but it is not really kicked in yet, so it's still pretty chilly in here, hence the scarf. This fireplace you see behind me is not real. It's that old line. Think of all the people on the Titanic who waved off the dessert cart. Arthur Ryerson, who has a cenotaph at Graceland Cemetery, was last seen on the deck of the Titanic cracking jokes about how the band was still playing. Now, Cindy, we don't do reruns around here unless I absolutely have to. Jamie, I think that's about what we're at here, 55 or so. I can survive it. It's fine. I'd rather not. The cats are all curled up on the blankets over there. Letting Benny finish up this tune, then we'll get started properly. It's chilly in here. And hopefully I can keep using my fingers properly.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now Benny...
All right, that is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I actually realized just how far back it was supposed to look like this for the last 10 minutes or so, last 10 or 15 minutes, like this. As I said, I'm running a little bit behind these days. All right, welcome along, everybody. Welcome, I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. We're bringing you today antique serial killers from Chicago history. One of the first virtual tours that we ever put together, and it's one that I never really went and redid the entire thing. So this is still kind of set up with a very 1.0 version of our virtual tours. That's kind of fun sometimes. What we got here is Mysterious Chicago, the book, just showing you some of my credentials. Murder Maps USA, brand new from Thames and Hudson. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, that was one of mine as well. We'll cover Holmes a bit tonight. And of course, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. That's one of my very latest book. I'm also on TV and the radio all the time, so I am, in fact, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to whatever I say, even when I'm standing here in a scarf because it's chilly in the apartment tonight and Twitter's about to die, and oh, it's a real party around here these days. It really has been feeling like we're just kind of hanging out on the Titanic over on Twitter the last couple of weeks. It's really been kind of fun. Only night that was more fun was we had the Romney death rally night. That was fun. But all right. We're going to start right back in the guy who may have been Chicago's first serial killer. It's kind of hard to know. Partly because it's very difficult to define exactly what a serial killer is. There's a lot of competing definitions out there. Most people would say if they kill multiple people over a long period of time, they count as a serial killer. Other people say that it has to go right to that specific sort of psychology where they're driven by kind of a need to kill. And in that case, I don't know how many we could really plug into this, because most of the multiple murderers in Chicago history are people who were doing it for money. The one guy who really fits the profile just about right was our very first person to be hanged for murder in Chicago. We're actually over here on the northwest side right now. Believe it or not, this is right by Superdog. But this little bit of forest preserve around Jefferson Park. Once upon a time, all of Jefferson Park was like this. There was like logging camps here. And one day, Lucretia Thompson, one of the few people who lived here, was asking people if they had seen her cows. This was the kind of town at the time where your cows might wander off and you might just have to ask around until somebody finds your cows. So eventually they started hearing some wailing that they thought was her cows or her calling for her cows. But really she was being murdered by a guy named John Stone. I have no photograph of John Stone to show you. I've never even found a drawing of the guy. But nearby the murdered body of Lucretia Thompson, they found John Stone setting fire to his pants. They arrested him for murder. And this was, once again, there's no drawings of it. Like, the newspaper that covered it the most was the Chicago Daily American. No relation to the later Evening American that Hearst put out. This was a Chicago paper in 1840 that mostly talked about William Henry Harrison. I mean, people like to imagine that there was some golden age where newspapers just gave you the facts, not their opinions. Those are people who have never read any old newspaper before. Chicago newspapers in the 1840s were generally like 3 pages of opinions and maybe a page of local news. They covered the trial of John Stone in remarkable detail, but usually they hardly covered local stuff at all, which is like, okay, there's 30 of us here and 20 of us have cholera, but you already know that, so we won't really go into this. Mostly they just rambled about how much they liked William Henry Harrison and talked shit about Martin Van Buren. So, John Stone, having been caught setting fire to his pants near the murdered body of Lucretia Thompson, was arrested by one of our 3 police officers at the time, a guy named Henry Rhines. Here's me doing the hand jive on the grave of Henry Rhines. In his capacity as one of 3 police officers, he spent most of his time trying to arrest people that he thought might be escaping from slavery. So John Stone was brought to trial, and on trial they asked him, okay, Stone, how come you were setting fire to your pants? And he said, oh, because they were dirty. And then they said, all right, so how come you didn't burn your shirt too? And he said, well, there was no blood on that. Oops. In jail, he told Philo Carpenter that no, I did not murder Lucretia Thompson, but I have murdered some other people, so I guess this is probably fair. You put this all together, it sounds to me as though we are dealing with what we would now call a serial killer here. He was eventually hanged down at about where down in the dunes about where 26th Street would be now, kind of near the lake shore. If he'd actually killed other people in the same way that he killed Lucretia Thompson, that sounds like a serial killer, but frankly, there's just not enough data. Now, as to who the first serial killer in Chicago would be, that's also a kind of a difficult question, the first acknowledged one. We tend to advertise H.H. Holmes as America's first serial killer. Really, he was not even the first in Chicago. There are 2 guys who are kind of tied for having come in before that. And one was a guy who had a doctor's office right over here on Madison Street. Move into like approximately the location where the place would have been. Now they've renumbered everything now because it gets a little bit tricky. Plus everything's been rebuilt since then. But right over here where the children's haircut place is was the office of Dr. Thomas Neal Cream. I see my face has disappeared, but that's all right. Okay, so Thomas Neal Cream was initially arrested early about 1880 after one of his patients died in the process of undergoing an abortion. Newspapers at the time couldn't resist puns, like cream a tartar, ho ho ho. But he had probably been doing this quite a bit. Eventually he would be hanged for various abortion-related crimes, not for providing them, but for also killing the people who were trying to get them. What really got him in trouble was he fell in love with a woman, and they decided to murder her husband, a guy by the name of Daniel Stott. So Daniel Stott was given poison, and they figured out what had happened right away. The girlfriend ratted him out. So here's his grave out in Garden Prairie. It says, Daniel Stott poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. So meanwhile, while he was in between a couple of his various legal cases, a woman named Alice Montgomery died in a nearby boarding house. They found she had undergone an abortion and then been given painkillers with way, way too much strychnine. But it was the murder of Daniel Stott that initially got him sent out to Joliet prison. Eventually, he got out, ended up in the UK, now looking like this. Really did need the hat. And eventually was caught providing abortions and then giving people painkillers full of way too much strychnine over and over again until finally he was executed. Now the hangman used to go around telling people that his last words were, I was Jack the, as though he were about to confess to being Jack the Ripper, but he was in prison at the time of the Ripper murders here in Joliet. This is a book, Prisoner 4374 by Amanda J. Griffiths-Jones. It's a novel based on all of her research into Cream. There's also been a recent one by Dean Job, which mentions me in the footnotes. The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, The Hunt for a Victorian-Era Serial Killer. I recommend that one. He mentions me for having figured out the thing about Alice Montgomery, the girl who died in the boarding house. I ran across that newspaper article while looking up something completely unrelated, and noticed, oh, she died in this boarding house, looked up, wasn't that right by Dr. Cream's address? And it was right by Dr. Cream's address. We'll move on a bit here. Now, for him to be our earliest Chicago acknowledged serial killer, it's kind of a virtual tie with a guy by the name of Henry Meyer. There's a picture of him. Now, he was also a doctor. His doctor was right about where that convenience store is that you can see over in the corner. When I first looked it up, I just knew what corner it was on. I was hoping it was going to turn out that it was right by the European Wax Center here. Unfortunately, we can't have everything. It would have been across the street from the other corner from the European Wax Center. But Henry Meyer had a doctor's office here, and we just covered him on True Crime at Graceland Cemetery the other day. There actually is a photograph of him, too, who has a very deer-caught-in-the-headlights look. But he was married to a woman named Caroline, but fell in love with a different Caroline who was married to a different Henry. This gets a little bit tricky here and there. But he decided that the best thing to do was to murder his spouse and her spouse, so he murdered Carolyn 1 and Henry 1, and Henry 2, and eventually was held for murder because of this. People figured out what had happened, and he tried to say, well, of course you're going to find strychnine in the body. She was sick, and I always give my patients strychnine. Sure. Henry number 2 is buried over at St. Boniface Cemetery now in an unmarked space. Whereas Carolyn 1, is in this unmarked space over here at Graceland, which really does just have the look about it of a serial killer's family plot. Right there. The empty lot, the lot record also shows that several of his children are buried in the plot there too, but most of them, I was able to look up enough to see that most of them are known to have died of natural causes, such as scarlet fever down there. Though there is one who was buried the same day that they died. So that's a little bit suspicious anyway. But Henry married Carolyn too, then she got really sick, but he didn't end up killing her, he just poisoned her, then moved on. Ended up marrying a woman by the name of Mary Dresser. And with Mary Dresser, he came up with a whole plan where she would marry rich guys, then they would kill them for the insurance money. How many times they did this is not really known, but apparently it was quite a few before they were eventually caught. And right in the middle of the trial, one of the jurors went insane. Like, he had a complete nervous breakdown, ended up in an asylum. They didn't have alternates at the time, so they had to redo the whole entire trial. And Meyer was eventually sentenced to do 20 years in Sing Sing prison. But he managed to get out at some point, and came right back to Chicago, right back to the neighborhood where he'd been in before, and started trying to recruit young women to do this same scheme, to marry rich guys and kill them for the insurance money. He even wrote a letter to one of them saying, "We evildoers love night and hate daylight." I wish I could find more data about that, but for some reason in 1919, when he was captured again, it really just didn't make the papers too much. There was like one tiny item saying, yeah, this is that same Henry Meyer from like 30 years ago. But in general, people just kind of let it go. I imagine he died in prison, but I'm not 100% sure. He's kind of difficult to look up because he wasn't the only Henry Meyer in Chicago. Not only that, he wasn't the only Henry Meyer who was born in Hamburg in 1836 who was operating in Chicago at the time. Let's mix things up a little bit here. Right over around the corner would have been the Grand Pacific Hotel, which for a while was home to one of my very favorite of these people, Minnie Wallace. Minnie Wallace is pictured here at 15, the age that she was when she married a guy, the mayor of Emporia, Kansas. He was 48, she was 15. Shortly after the wedding, he died of arsenic poisoning. Now, in the trial, they brought up all this stuff that apparently he used to go to brothels all the time and used to take arsenic, partly because he thought it protected him from sexually transmitted infections, and partly because he thought that it gave him magic powers of some sort. So eventually, even though all of the evidence was very strongly against Minnie, they ended up acquitting her. And frankly, not that I'm advocating murder, but you know what I always say. If you're 48 and you talk a 15-year-old girl into marrying you, and then she kills you and takes all your money, that's on you, dude. So after that, she went back home to New Orleans to live for a while, then moved up to the Grand Pacific Hotel here in Chicago. Here, after a while, she married another old guy by the name of John B. Ketchum, who also promptly died. Now, in that case, nobody officially suspected her of murder other than his family, but she didn't end up being indicted, didn't end up going to trial or anything. She had a doctor sign off saying that Jack Ketchum had died entirely of alcohol poisoning from after years of being an alcoholic. Here's his grave in Toledo. We found that on one particularly memorable find-a-grave. It's coming up around the edge here. I've also been through the probate file of this guy, though, and did notice that Minnie paid the doctor a lot of money. The doctor who said that he died of natural causes was paid and paid handsomely. But she never went to trial. Then there was a couple other people that they suspect might have been victims of her as well. I'm not really sure if it's actually true or not. I'm never really sure if she's killed any of these guys. That first one, the evidence is pretty clearly weighted in her favor, but once again, it's on him. And of course, here we are at 63rd and Wallace, formerly the home, and famously the home, of a guy that will just blow through here a little bit because I know I've covered this guy a lot, but in case anybody is new out there, I'm not seeing too many new names in the comments. I think it's just I think it's just us chickens tonight. That's all right. I haven't advertised this one little bit. But this was the home of H.H. Holmes. And this is a lost photo of Holmes. This was drawn in a couple of Chicago papers as his Chicago picture. But the actual photograph has never turned up. People send me what they think are lost photos of H.H. Holmes all the time. They usually don't look anything like him. Just some dude in a mustache. But right about in this space where we're walking right now stood the building that we came to call the Murder Castle. According to legend, it was full of everything you could possibly need to kill a person. Secret rooms, trapdoors, hidden passages. It is a little bit true. There were some hidden rooms in there, but they weren't so secret that everybody who lived and worked there didn't know about them. Mostly they were for hiding stolen furniture. They did also find a lot of things that you could use to kill a person in there, but they would do the same thing if they looked at your house. I mean, you got cleaning products under your sink? You could kill people with those. It's kind of a sobering thing to think of, as you could build a murder castle out of the things you find at home. But what got him in trouble, really, was he had a friend by the name of Benjamin Peitzel. He told Benjamin Peitzel one day, "Ben, you owe me big for getting you out of jail for that check passing scheme. What we're going to do is we're going to fake your death. We're going to get a dead body that looks like you, then we'll say that it was you, take that $10,000 life insurance payout, move to South America, and live like kings. Damn hell-ass kings." Peitzel probably should have known better because Holmes did not fake his death. Holmes just killed Benjamin Peitzel and started traveling around with a couple of his daughters, Alice and Nellie, along with a son named Howard. Now, the insurance company put two and two together and realized that that this guy had a rap sheet as long as your arm for various swindles and schemes, tracked him to Boston, had him arrested. At this point, not only were the three kids no longer in his custody, but people started asking questions about people like this Minnie Williams girl who used to be seen hanging around with him. What about her? What about her sister? Didn't they disappear too? He was eventually put on trial just for insurance fraud, but people were starting to wonder, where are those kids? He initially said they were off with their father, then he changed his story and said, no, their dad really was dead. I just made it look like an accident when it was really suicide, just so they'd get the insurance money, because I'm just a nice guy like that. But a detective was put on the case after Holmes said, no, it really was a dead body. The kids are just off with Minnie Williams, that disappeared woman. She's with the kids now. They're all off in London together. Yeah, that's it, London. Eventually, he did find the girls' bodies in Toronto. And then everybody knew that this was a murder case. Back in Chicago, we had a brand new chief of police named John J. Badenoch who had no idea what he was doing. He was a former flour and feed dealer who got the new job as chief of police because the new mayor liked the cut of his jib. So they spent a few weeks going around here coming up with all these theories as to how people could have been killed until the newspaper started saying, you know what, this has been fun for a while, but they're not really finding anything that's backing any of this stuff up. The cops tried to bring in a guy named M.G. Chappell who said that he used to buy dead bodies from Holmes to turn into skeletons to sell to medical schools, but newspapers pretty quickly figured out that he was just a guy who would say whatever the cops told him to if they poured enough whiskey down his throat. But as is often the case with these things, when a lot of these stories are debunked, it's only the wildest stories that get remembered. If you look this up, you'll see this tabloid article from the New York World. The diagram of the second floor with the 5-door room, the room of the 3 corpses, the hanging secret chamber, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft. And people still ask me about this, like, didn't he have a room for hanging people? That's not even really what it says on here. The hanging secret chamber meant it was hanging between the first and the second and the third. But there were a few people who disappeared from the place. Besides the aforementioned Minnie Williams, there was her sister Nanny Williams. They probably would have been killed up on the north side, but they both disappeared after hanging around with Holmes in July of 1893. There's also a woman named Emmeline Segrand who had disappeared in 1892 after hanging around with Holmes. And his former mistress, girlfriend, Julia Connor, and her 6-year-old daughter Pearl had disappeared in 1891. Holmes tried to tell everybody, oh no, it wasn't me, it was this guy Edward Hatch, he did the whole thing. But it didn't work. He was eventually convicted of just the murder of Benjamin Peitzel and hanged in Philadelphia in 1896. Recently he was exhumed to make sure that it was still him. It was. But the Edward Hatch thing came back up in the newspaper several years later when people decided, you know who else lived around there? There was a guy by the name of Johann Hock who lived right around the corner from there on Union Avenue, the next street down to the right from the castle site. Well, that's where he lived in the fairly later in his history anyway. Let me move this stuff around a little bit. But H.H. Holmes was dead by the turn of the 20th century, but shortly before his death, a guy had moved to Chicago by the name of Johann Hock. He was calling himself, he had just started calling himself that. Previously, he had been married to a woman in West Virginia named Hock. His name originally was Jacob Schmidt. He came to America under the name Jacob Huff. Married a woman named Carolyn Hock. She died under mysterious circumstances, and he disappeared, came to Chicago, and started calling himself Mr. Hock. This was a habit he had of appropriating the former last names of his dead wives. It's kind of a gruesome souvenir he would take. But he moved right up to here and met a woman by the name of Julia Steinbrecher, who looked about like this. And this was Hock himself. Hock was running a pub here in Chicago, found out about this widow. She married him and then promptly died of poisoning. As they were taking her body out to Graceland Cemetery, a priest or a minister or one of the friends tried to stop the funeral procession and said, I think this woman was murdered. But Hock showed up with a doctor's certificate saying she had died of nephritis, and that was it. He had the doctor's note. There wasn't much they could do about it. So Hock spent the next just about a decade bumming around. He married, I'd say, about another 13 or 14 women. Usually he would just take their money and run, but a couple of others died under mysterious circumstances as well. I've been working on this case particularly hard the last month or so, getting all of his letters, trying to put things together as well as I possibly can. I'm even going through all of the German newspapers. In fact, here's a find from just the other day. This came up at his trial. This is from the Abendpost, which is Evening Post, one of the German language papers in Chicago. This is a part of their classified section called Heiratsgesuch, which is marriage proposals. So down at the bottom of this arrow, what that says is widower, under 30, craftsman, no children, seeks woman for companionship, object matrimony. Right to this post office box, 422 Abendpost. So note he said that he was in his early 30s here. You really think, honestly, she probably should. But it was answered by a woman named Marie Walker, who had a candy store up in the Lincoln Park area, invited him to come and talk, and she was apparently not thrown off by the fact that he was clearly much older than he said he was in the ad. They talked for half an hour, and he said, all right, I like you, you like me, we can get married then, yeah? This was just a business proposition. He was usually marrying people who were widows, people who didn't really have too many prospects of their own, didn't like working too much, and didn't have too many options for jobs to begin with. So it seemed like an attractive business proposition. She agreed to marry him, and a couple of months later they were wed. 6 weeks after that, she died of kidney failure, nephritis. Most likely it was arsenic poisoning. But while her body was still lying on the bed, Hawk proposed to her sister, Amelia. And her sister said yes. But that marriage lasted exactly 1 day before Hawk took all of her money and ran off. But this alerted everybody. A newspaper editor from the Chicago American noticed something in the death records that got him suspicious. They went to talk to Amelia and immediately realized something was up here. So Marie was exhumed from Oakwood Cemetery. This started about a 10-day manhunt where they were trying to find Hawk all over the place as more and more reports of all the other women he had married and killed came in. Eventually, Hawk was captured in New York where he had already proposed to his landlady at the boarding house. And in his possession, they found a fountain pen that was filled with arsenic. At this point, the numbers of his various wives had come up and had gone up and up and up. Some of these were people who were saying that he married them in a year when he was definitely in prison. Here he is looking like the guy on the Pringles can. With 10 days of no real news and not finding him, the newspapers just had to come up with all kinds of stuff. The Chicago American suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, he was a twin brother of this other murderer, Louis Toombs. Almost a dead ringer, right? No. There was also a lot of speculation about the fact that, hey, this guy lived right next to the old Holmes Castle. Maybe he was Edward Hatch. But it's really weird looking at just how far down the memory hole the Holmes case had gotten. Everybody seemed to remember that they were looking for this guy, Jake Hoffman. Maybe this was Jake Hoffman. Nobody was looking for a Jake Hoffman in 1895. They were looking for an Edward Hatch. The police chief at the time was a guy by the name of George Shippey, who was frankly kind of a nut, and it would eventually end up in asylums himself. We also had Coroner Hoffman was on the case, who was fabulously corrupt and also completely unqualified for his job. But Hawk was brought back, eventually put on trial just for murdering Marie, and he'd always assumed he would get away with this because there was usually arsenic in embalming fluid. As soon as an undertaker stepped into a room, nobody was going to get convicted for arsenic poisoning. But now they were using formaldehyde. They'd embalmed Marie with a formula that did not use any arsenic. It still took a lot of research. They still had to really dig because he'd also figured out that it would be harder to find if it was administered not through the mouth. If you get my gist. But he loved it when all these reports of other people that he could be actually cleared of came in, because he kept telling people that I'm getting blamed for everybody who has ever been abandoned. Look at all the people who looked just like me. So he gathered all these guys from the prison who looked he claimed looked just like him. It's like, I wouldn't really say so. But for the first couple of days of his imprisonment, the police were trying to butter him up into confessing, so he got them to take him to a barber shop. Here he is all cleaned up for this photo. And he told these guys, you know, you are very lucky to look like me, because the ladies can't resist you when they know you look like Johann Hawk. It was worth a shot. But he was eventually convicted of that murder. They managed to drag on the appeals for almost a year, until finally he was hanged here in Chicago. They broke out the really big type for the headline for this one. You can see how big of a font they were using. Now, just a couple of years later, he had been working primarily through the matrimonial agencies and through matrimonial ads in newspapers, which I would honestly say just about everybody who was posting those advertisements must have been a swindler, and quite a few of them are also murderers. Now, right up here at Forest Home Cemetery, we'll move over a little bit, past the ducks. And the first several times I tried to get footage of this grave, it was completely underwater. Here's a duck sailing right over it. But this is the burial place out at Forest Home Cemetery of Belle Gunness, who wrote this letter to one of the people who had entered her ads, saying, come prepared to stay forever. Belle looked like this when she was younger. By the time she was pulling these schemes, she looked about like this. Now, one day she started out working in Chicago, but after making some insurance money payouts on places burning down, she bought a farm in LaPorte, Indiana. And then one day there was a massive fire at the farm that apparently killed Belle, though there were a lot of doubts at the time whether she was really killed in the fire or faked the whole thing or what. But as they started digging out the rubble, they just found body after body after body. Apparently, she had been luring people to her farm and then having them killed and then fed to the hogs. Number of bodies were found. Police in Chicago tried to say, well, maybe she was really having them killed in Chicago and then shipped out to her place. But a lot of this, and the newspapers also suspected, no, she probably wasn't really killed in the fire. She's off in disguise someplace now. They put all these composites together of what she might look like in disguise. And a couple of people noted, hey, what if she and Johann Hawk might have answered each other's ads? Wouldn't that have been wild? You can totally picture that. There was even some hint of a connection. There was a woman by the name of Justine Leffler. There was a body that was found among the Hawk victims that some people suspected might have been among the Gunness victims. There was the body of a woman mixed in with all of the men. And people suspected, well, maybe this was Justina Leffler, a woman who disappeared and was thought to be a victim of Johann Hawk. Maybe Hawk had married her, then sent her down to Belle Gunness to be murdered. Now, this is actually one of the official lines of the Chicago police, but it was only by a guy named Clifton Woolridge, who wrote this book, 20 Years a Detective, who was on the matrimonial agencies beat, but was not actually involved in the Hawk case, and didn't realize that the timeline didn't line up. Hawk was in jail at the time that Justina Leffler married whoever she married, and a cousin who came out to identify the body that was found said, no, that's not her. Now, the best book about Belle Gunness so far has been Harold Schechter's Hell's Princess. I recommend that over anything else. It's about as close as we're really going to get. This is one of those cases we're never really going to know for sure exactly what happened. Now, when the house burned down, we don't know if she set fire to it, if it was all a big fake, if it was a suicide, or if this disgruntled employee had set fire to the place. It was a whole thing. A couple of years, around the same time, we had a case in Chicago where, down here on 19th Street, the members of the Vrazel family started dying off, all apparently of poisoning. They arrested the family fortune teller, a guy by the name of Herman Billick. The story was that he had tried to poison them off because he wanted to marry Mary, the mother of the family. There are a couple of this is Martin and Rosa Vrazel. Whole setup of the people, the victims, so they said it followed his powders. But this was the theory of Inspector Shippey anyway. And in those days, they were not really concerned about getting the right person. They were just concerned about getting somebody. Like, Herman was a fortune teller, seemed appropriately foreign. He was going to be a really easy guy to pin this on. Coroner Hoffman was so sure that it was so sure he could get a conviction that he deliberately avoided any investigations or any bit of evidence that might have cleared his name. While Herman was in prison, another member of the Vrazel family died of apparent arsenic poisoning, which kind of pointed to the guilt of Emma Vrazel, who was a daughter of the family who had more to gain from it than anybody else, would have been in a position to kill everybody who had died. But Hoffman very deliberately avoided doing an investigation, looking too closely into the body, because he'd already picked his guy. He knew he could get a conviction. The fact that he might be hanging an innocent person didn't really matter very much to him. All of this is covered in really great detail in this book, Steve Shookus's Poisoned, which covers the whole story of Herman Billick and of Coroner Hoffman and Inspector Shippey and all of the underhanded deals they were getting through over and over again. I think Johann Hawk might have felt so confident because he knew that he was never going to get convicted. Didn't really occur to him the extent to which, even if he had been innocent, Shippey and Hoffman surely would have cooked something up. Elsewhere, let me move back on here a little bit. Down around here, near the Starbucks on Ogden Avenue at 2044 South Ogden, this approximately would have been the home of a woman by the name of Louise Lindloff in the 1910s, circa 1912. Now, Louise Lindloff was a fortune teller, and she owned this crystal ball that she said contained a tear from the eye of Cleopatra. She paid hundreds of dollars for this thing. Now, whether she really believed it had that tear or not, or whether she really believed she was talking to the spirits, or if it was just kind of an act that she would never let up on, I've never been 100% sure. She certainly kept the act up, whatever happened. But she started predicting the deaths of family members. Now, whether this was to boost her reputation as a psychic or to get the insurance money, Nobody's 100% sure, but they did find notes because you kind of calculated how long each insurance payoff would last. So eventually, one of the police inspectors showed up at her house posing as another psychic crystal ball reader and said, "I've heard about all this crystal ball of yours. I want to try it out." So she let him have a go, and he said, "I can see all of your family members. They're saying that you killed them." So she was put on trial. Her lawyer was George Remus, who later became a famous bootlegger and sometimes said to be one of the inspirations for The Great Gatsby. At the time, he was not only a criminal lawyer, he was also the father of Romola Remus, who was the first person to play Dorothy in a Wizard of Oz movie. She was on trial right at the same time as a woman by the name of Louise Vermiglia, who was also going around poisoning people, though she was eventually acquitted. So I've gone through as many newspapers as I can find, hoping to find a picture of the crystal ball. And I've never quite been able to do it. And her lawyer tried to claim that what these people, yes, they may have died of arsenic poisoning, but it wasn't murder. They probably died because of the arsenic in the wallpaper. And there did tend to be arsenic in wallpaper at the time. It was used in a really green hues. There's a great book about the whole thing called Bitten by Witch Fever by Lucinda Dickens Hawksley, who I got to take on a tour one time. She was really cool. It was so fun to hang out with her. And quite a lot of murderers tried to claim that the arsenic probably just came from the wallpaper, but it didn't work for pretty much anybody. It certainly did not work for Louise Lindlof. She was sentenced to life in prison and died in jail not long after. We got one more arsenic killer to cover. That is another person whose house is actually still standing. And this, over here on Winchester Street, in Little Poland, lived a woman by the name of Tilly Klimek. Now, one day Tilly's husband took really sick, Mr. Klimek, and a lot of neighbors started saying, a lot of her husbands have died after getting really sick. So they tested the husband, who was still in the hospital, and found that, in fact, he had been poisoned with arsenic. At that point, they started exhuming other people based on all of these relatives. This is one of her previous houses where she was living. Oh, this is one where she was living with Mr. Klimek himself. That last one was where her last victim had died. But she was arrested eventually, along with her cousin Nellie. And between the two of them, they were eventually accused of killing about 20 different people. So here's the thing. I always thought this old picture that was in the Tribune archives was them digging up one of Tilly's husbands. It's actually a cousin of the family. In Tilly's own family plot, where she herself is not buried, she was buried in a term grave somewhere in the same cemetery out at St. Adalbert's. But one of our most memorable Find a Grave Fridays recently, I finally took this picture out there to St. Adalbert's. Figured out who they were probably digging up at the time. It was a woman who was a cousin of hers named Rose. And after much hunting, we found the actual grave in question. There it is. Back and forth here a little. Well, here, I'll move this one up. Move it over. You can see the that eagle statue, that angel statue in the background. The cross that used to be on top of this grave is actually lying against the one in the background right now. This was a really cool thing to have found. I was really proud of us all that day. And I've always assumed that this shot was posed. I mean, you got these two guys dressed like Cruella de Vil henchmen, and the one guy like pointing, saying, "Yes, dig there," as though they didn't know where to dig. But Tilly was eventually convicted of the murder of her previous husband and sentenced to life in prison. She died in jail and was buried out here at St. Adalbert's Cemetery. For reasons I'm not entirely clear on, they eventually cleared Nellie Kulik, her cousin, who was sitting there on the left. Nellie even had her own children come and testify against her, so this, in fact, would have made for some very awkward family reunions later on. I guess they just decided they didn't have quite enough evidence to convict her personally. Also, it was famously difficult to convict a woman of murder in Chicago, no matter how good the evidence was. It was a very common talking point at the time, and really already had been for quite a long time at the time of Tilly Klimek's arrest in the early 1920s. It's part of why they ended up continuing to prosecute Herman Billick, despite all evidence that Emma Vrazel was probably the guilty party. He was convicted primarily on the evidence of a kid named Jerry. Jerry Vrosel was giving testimony saying that he'd seen Mr. Billick administering these white powders to people, but he later went back and said, "No, I didn't really see that. I said that in court because the police told me they'd hang me if I didn't say that." Exactly the kind of stuff they used to pull in those days. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, that is antique serial killers in Chicago history. I could do like an entire presentation on each one of these individual people. A couple of them I have. A couple of them we're working on some bigger ones. But right now, as I said, I'm not really thinking ahead this week. I'm trying to chill out as much as I can. So next week we'll definitely be back here on Thursday at 8 o'clock. We'll do something on Sunday morning as well, but I don't know just what yet. I'm taking advantage of the fact that I don't have to think ahead too much right now. So in the meantime, we're just going to put the Benny Goodman back on and hang out. I can hear the radiator hissing now. It's finally starting to warm back up in here after a very chilly day. So once again, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, and here is Benny Goodman. Is Twitter still up? Looks like so far. Thanks, Laura. I love this green chair, too. That's my whole setup here now. We moved things around a couple of months ago, if you haven't been around in a while. But yeah, my email wasn't working all afternoon. Like, I didn't get any email at the Mysterious Chicago account for 24 hours. It's all fixed now, but it's like, to paraphrase Rodney Dangerfield, I got up, Ticketmaster wasn't working. Now Twitter's not working, my radiator's not working, my email's not working, everything I touch breaks. I'm afraid to go to the bathroom. And yes, Hawk is unmarked out in Elmwood Cemetery. He was initially buried in Dunning, but a couple of days later they moved him. His space, if he's got a marker, I couldn't find it. And they couldn't give me the exact coordinates in the section where he is. Yeah, Chris, and I got to admit, I got to battle with Miles about this chair quite a bit. He keeps wanting to scratch at it. Speaking of that, I got to find Miles in a minute. You know, the radiators were working as of like 2 days ago. But something went wrong with the furnace. Now, Miles only scratches it when I'm sitting in it, though, so at least that's going okay. Did Mr. Hawk kill anybody in Germany? I'm not sure. Getting details on his life in Germany are really scarce. I've been able to piece together a bit by going through German newspapers. Hey, Miles, I was just going to go find you. Here's the man of the hour, clothed in immense power.
That was the bugle tall rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
He was, in fact, very cuddly all day. So one good thing about your radiator being gone, the cats want to cuddle. Doreen, no, the whole building had the same issue. It was only about a 36-hour period, though. Does Hawk have any really living relatives? Not that I know of. He had a few kids in Germany. But last name Schmidt. Hard to find him. We did come from a very small town, which should make it easier, but so far I haven't found anything. Are we doing Find a Grave tomorrow? Of course we are. We had Priya over there a while ago, so you probably could have seen her. I gotta find some really living relatives to claim Hawk was Jack the Ripper. The timeline about works. He would have been 26 at the time of the Ripper murders, and his whereabouts in 1888 are not well known. He had a whole lot of different stories about his background. The most reliable put him in this small town, the son of a tinsmith. Doreen, yes, they cuddle together.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking, and here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Doreen, do I ever take time off? Nah. I think there was one day that I took off. Unmarked graves for serial killers is in fact a trend. I don't know too many who have a marker. Among these ones, I don't think any of them has a marker. When I go on my one day off, it was after our old cat Charlotte died. So I just kind of sat in the coffee shop. I worked on Patreon posts, I think. Thank you, Georgia. Thanks to everybody who's heading to Venmo. I'm trying not to make it a really long Find a Grave tomorrow because I do have a research day lined up over at the History Museum microfilm room. Picking up some more stuff from Gene Cowgill, one of the newspaper writers who ended up interviewing Hawk. Hawk told her, "I'm not really German, I'm French," among other weird stuff. Yeah, we miss our Charlotte. But Miles and Priya get along very well. I'm also waiting for some interlibrary loan reels over the Harold Washington Library. Oh, Lisa, I'll be dressing warm, I assure you. It does me no good not to dress for the weather. Miles, how did you even do that? There's Miles standing on his head. Purr, purr, purr. Yeah, sometimes he's so mellow. Not if he wants attention and I'm working at the desk. Here he is, just rubbing his head up against the computer. I'm trying to show it. Miles, you're always knocking down the Springsteen record over here. Miles. You're just staring at it like it's prey, huh? Miles, no, don't get on the keyboard. I cannot convince him not to walk on the keyboard. He wants the space to himself right now. So, I'll probably just have to surrender. Sit down for a minute. Yeah, if you're on the Patreon, you should be getting about up to 4 posts a week, depending on what tier you're on. Sometimes more. Incidentally, my album is out in a few hours. The Limited Neon by the Limited Time.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Heather, yeah, it should be on Spotify. Wherever streams are strum. I'll probably get it up on Bandcamp too. Miles' album. Miles, you gonna record Kind of Blue? Here you go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch your troubles by the toe. If it hollers, let it go, let it fly away. It's a saying, high and low. Hear it everywhere you go, any time of day. Barley sings it, Wiseman rings it, even Mr. Crosby swings it. Miles, are you climbing my back? No, don't do that, Miles. Give a little more attention. All right. Why don't you say goodnight to everybody, Miles? And then we got the hiss of the radiator, so it's going to warm back up in here. So far, I'm still a little bit chilly. I, too, am going to go veg. Until tomorrow morning. So, okay, once again, everybody, tomorrow morning we got Find a Grave Friday, just like always. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Telling everybody to stay warm. Most of all, everybody, stay spooky, everybody. Ladatov.